Chapter 7, which is plant taxonomy. Taxonomy should not be a new term for you, but we will talk more about that in a minute. Your chapter outcomes, which are also your learning targets, are to discuss the historical origins of the plant classification system, describe the hierarchical orders of plants, interpret a plant identification key, describe the purpose of herbaria, and explore careers related to plant taxonomy. So if you look at taxonomy, that's the science of naming and classifying organisms. And you guys, this is nothing new to you because you've seen, like for example, a timber wolf is Canis lupus. And when you look at that whole concept, they're classifying these animals so we can properly identify them. And it's no different than plants. Classification is the system of grouping like organisms together. So you already know, like we're going to go back to that wolf example because when you hear Canis, you might think of canine, and that's what you're supposed to do because it's in the same group with dogs. If you look at the historical piece, a lot of this is, if you look at it, it talks about Theopartus, assistant to Aristotle, who divided plants by their growth characteristics into trees, shrubs, half-shrubs, and herbs. So they started to kind of organize this. And then if you look at Carlos Linnaeus, which is probably somebody more familiar to you if you've heard about taxonomy before, they're really credited with coming up with the system that we currently have. If you look at like the plants, even on the slide, you have dill, carrots, and Queen Anne's lace. They're all members of the parsley family. Part of the reason they're categorized that way is they all have that kind of umbrella shape to their flowers that you can see. But basically what happens when you look at these names, the binomial nomenclature is a two-name system, and it's typically Latin. It's a dead language, and that's why they use it, because it's not going to change. And this way people can know that, hey, I'm talking about the same plant you're talking about, whether there is a language barrier or not. Part of the interesting piece here is that you're looking at basically DNA, which is in a gel electrophoresis on this image. Makes it look super cool. But they're talking about morphology too. Some of that can be even when you have hybrid plants. They tend to take on characteristics of both. But we can look at that through some DNA analysis. We're not going to get that deep into this. This is giving you, which this is not new either, you probably have heard the kings play cards on fat green stools or some other mnemonic device to remember. If you look down the line here, that's probably what you would recall. Some that you may not know is domain, and then variety and cultivar, which we'll get into in the next set of slides here. So domain, that one replaced prokaryotes and eukaryotes. It's the highest, most inclusive ranking. There's 3 domains: eubacteria, which is true bacteria, archaea, and then eukaryotes. The kingdom, there's 6 of them. You have plant is the one that we're going to be looking at. They have to be multicellular, have cell walls. That's your basic cell model stuff you guys maybe made out of Jell-O at one point. They have to be autotrophic, which means they make their own food, and there's over 400,000 subspecies. Phylum, there's 4 major groups: non-vascular plants, seedless vascular plants, gymnosperms, and angiosperms. Non-vascular plants, they don't have any vascular system. They transport water and nutrients. They're very small, so you can see like the moss on this log here. They lack roots, stems, and leaves. They produce spores. And you can see, like I said, there's mosses on this. That's, one of your examples. Seedless vascular plants, they have a system of xylem and phloem, which is how the plant transports nutrients through their stems. This is actually a horsetail. You guys maybe have played with it. It's kind of, you can pull it apart and push it back together. You usually find it in kind of swampy areas. They have true roots, leaves, and stems. They're spore producing. The examples they have are ferns, club mosses, horsetails, and whisk ferns. Gymnosperms, these are non-flowering plants that produce seeds. They are wind-pollinated. They have cones. The examples they have are conifers, cycads, and ginkgos. This is a ginkgo tree here. Conifers, think of pine trees. Think of, they have needles. They have cones that they drop. Then you have angiosperms. These are kind of to me, the really pretty ones because they are the flowering plants. They are going to have their seeds enclosed in fruits. They are a vascular plant. They're diverse in sizes. Could be your flowering annuals and perennials, fruits and vegetables, and then those woody ornamentals. This is actually a type of petunia. Probably looks familiar to you guys. They're pretty common. When you get to class, that basically is what separates plants in a phylum. There's seeded vascular plant phyla. There's a class for ANGIOSPERMAE and then GYMNOSPERMAE. When you look at the ANGIOSPERMAE class, this one has beans, roses, magnolias, geraniums. They're a dicot, meaning they have two cotyledons that pop up first. It's the two true leaves that come out. They have net-veined leaves, flower parts in multiples of 4s or 5s. Usually have a vascular cambium and vascular bundles arranged in a ring. And then if you look at the angiosperm class, you have grasses, lily, orchids, agaves, and palms in the pictures here. They're in that order too if you're confused. They're a monocot plant, and monocots typically look like a grass when they come up. They have one single leaf that pops up. They're parallel veined leaves, meaning, they're in a row together. Think of like a leaf of a corn plant if you've seen one, or a blade of grass. They have straight veins next to each other. Their floral structures in multiples of 3. The vascular bundles are scattered or in rings of 2 or more. So this is showing you, basically showing you the evolutionary relationship among plants. And these words probably all look like gibberish to you because they're Latin. So this is going to be the order of roses and then how they broke down into different types of roses. So yes, all of the roses are related, but they have pieces and components that make them different. So in a family, not meaning the ones that live in your house, they basically separate plants in an order. Useful ranking, similar floral structures. They attract similar pests. They attract similar diseases. And they also need similar nutrients. So it's kind of nice to know about when you hear them talk about like maybe a brassica family because they're talking about broccoli or something like that. And broccoli and mustard are the ones pictured here. They also have similar physical traits. So they've kind of grouped them that way. And then you get into genus. So these are the ones like when we had that example of the wolf with the Canis lupus, that first word Canis is the genus. It's a subset of organisms within a family that share characteristics. The first letter is always going to be capitalized. The rest will be italicized or underlined, depending on what text you're working with. It's also the first part of the scientific name, like I just said. If you look at species, this is the lowest ranking piece. It's the least inclusive ranking. These groups are capable of interbreeding. So if you have a Canis lupus and a Canis lupus, meaning 2 wolves, male and female, you could breed them. Same concept with plants, just a little bit different in the reproduction aspect. So they are capable of producing fertile offspring. The variety or subspecies, they'll have a unique trait. There could be some local adaptation. Maybe they're a different color flower because of a soil composition piece. They have a specific epithet. Second half of the binomial name. Italicized or underlined, same in many species, never stands alone. So you're always going to have, like it says here, genus name plus specific epithet equals the scientific name. And the picture here is a paper birch. And it's kind of funny because it's the epithet of paperifera. It's a Latin for a derivative of paper. So they try to name them so they make sense, but if you don't know Latin, it's not going to make sense. And guess what? I don't even know Latin. Then they're talking about varieties. So if I am shopping and I'm looking in the Gurney's catalog and I'm looking at sweet corn, they're going to have a whole bunch of different varieties I can pick from. That's where things get a little bit different from our aspect, knowing that I can pick maybe one that has all white kernels, maybe one that has white and yellow kernels, one that has higher sugar content, but they're all going to be related. So this is a form of species, slightly different. It could be leaf color, leaf pattern, thorn versus thornless. It really depends on what us as consumers have looked for, and they've kind of helped breed plants to either get rid of a trait or maybe, emphasize something like maybe the vibrance of a color for a flower because people really liked a certain color. Then they have cultivar. So that plant that has been bred or selected for horticultural purposes, the first letter is capitalized, name enclosed in single quotes. So this is an example showing you those single quotes. So like this one, it says on the image that there's 2 cultivars, there's Bing and Rainier grafted on one cherry tree. So you can see there's 2 different colors here, and that's kind of what they're getting at, that they basically made this tree grow together. We'll cover grafting later on, but you can basically fuse 2 trees together and make them grow together, which is super cool. And then plant keys. This is going to be helpful for identifying plants. This is a hard piece for some students, but I'll give you guys some tips for that as we go on. There's some specific characteristics like the shape of a leaf, maybe the number of leaves, but then they'll work through a dichotomous key for some of them too, where does it have, a bundle of 3 needles on this pine tree, or does it have 2? And they'll work their way to figure out through yes or no answers to get to the one that we assume it is. And this is Herbaria, Herbarium. It says repository for collected plant specimens. And I do have some of these in the classroom. I don't have ones that are used with formaldehyde. Those are typically really old at this point. We have safer chemicals we can use now. But this, you can see it's labeled. They also have some measurement tool. They're trying to give specimens so that you can see what that plant sample would look like. It's very helpful, especially for places like where we live, super cold outside, during certain times of the year. And if you're trying to study, types of plants, that's really going to be able to help. But thankfully, we have things like Quizlet, so we can use images and try to do the same thing. This also has a career connection of herbarium director or curator. This is a lot of times going to be found at like a college level or for a botanical garden. And they will typically require some higher level degree or possibly some experience. The other one they have listed here is an ecologist. These people are going to work to understand ecosystems and kind of work to understand, if I put a plant in this area, how is it going to affect other things? So maybe if I introduce this flower, is it going to do well in my yard? Is it not going to do well? They do study those kinds of things and also look at some of the native plant species and how it can help or even hurt a wildlife population. So that is your plant taxonomy piece. That is chapter 7 from our textbook.